Welcome to another episode of Just One More Fix. This is James. With me in this episode is Lacey and Lee.
Hey.
You can find us online at justonemorefix.com or on Twitter at justonemorefix. If you like us, head over to iTunes or to Google Play and give us a rating and a comment. In this episode number 7, we're going to talk about horror. And now, it's time to get our gaming fix. Alright, so welcome to an episode of Just One More Fix. Couple of announcements. One, we are officially on iTunes and Google Play. We crossed 100 downloads, which I thought was pretty cool. Yeah, so thanks for listening to us. We are on Twitter, so I think that's in the intro. It's at Just One More Fix. We're on Facebook, Just One More Fix Podcast. And our URL is justonemorefix.com, and you can leave comments and whatever. And if you have anything that you want to hear from us or any questions, you can email me at james@justonemorefix.com. Also, on a side note, our release schedule is usually once a week. I've been trying to drop them on Wednesday. Sometimes it gets pushed back to Thursday, depending on my work schedule and how editing goes. But also, we're going to start reviewing games, focusing on indie games or smaller press games, and a lot of the mid-level press games like Eden Studios, Kenzer and Company. Not the big heavy hitter producers, I guess you might say. So look for those. Hopefully once a week. Those will be shorter episodes. Probably 20 minutes on the long side of things, hopefully. Just depends on how it goes. So yeah, so I guess we're just going to jump right into this. With us today is me, Lacey, and Lee. Kurt was going to be here, but he had a family emergency, so our thoughts are out with him today. Lee, for those of you who don't know, is Lacey's brother, so he's here with us today.
Older, but let's be honest, slightly less awesome, although his beard, much more impressive.
Yeah, he does have an impressive beard. So, Lee, I guess we're going to bombard you with some questions like we did to Carrie because it was her first time here to introduce you to everybody. Tell us who you are.
My name is Lee. I'm Lacey's older brother, Carrie's husband, James's brother-in-law.
The list goes on and on.
I like to play games.
Right on. So, how long have you been gaming for?
About the same length of time that Lacey has. More than 10 years.
Sounds good.
We'll call it more than 15 years.
All right.
Probably less than that.
Mundane life?
I'm a house husband. I stay at home and hang out with my kids all day.
Excellent.
Go to school?
Sometimes.
There you go. What are your favorite games to play?
Yes.
So do you have a favorite genre or theme or setting? No?
I'd be willing to try just about anything as long as I get the game.
Do you have a favorite game to run?
I always like to run games I'm more comfortable with, things I've been doing longer. New World of Darkness, Dungeons and Dragons, those are easy ones for me. But I try new things sometimes too. Burning Wheel is new for me. All Flesh Must Be Eaten, Dark Heresy. I picked up a copy of Fate of the Norns Ragnarok, the last Gen Con. I haven't run it yet, but I'm excited to try.
Cool.
Would you say that you run more games or play in more games?
It's about 50-50. I play more here in another gaming group we have at Carrie's brother's house. We occasionally game, and I usually run there.
Which do you prefer?
I prefer to play.
Right, that's fair.
Do you recall the first game that you played?
No.
No? Don't
Like,
even remember?
the very first game I played, that's kind of a fuzzy area. It was probably a game of Hero Quest, which is more of a board game than an RPG, to be honest. But
it's a lot like a pre-made dungeon scenario, though. It plays it's like having a miniatures set.
I feel like it kind of walks you into gaming, if that makes sense.
If you're not familiar with Hero Quest,
it's the gateway drug of gaming. So, I guess to back up for a minute, you said Dungeons and Dragons. So do you mean 2nd edition, 3rd edition?
I started playing in 2nd edition, but I hadn't been playing for very long when 3rd edition came out.
Okay.
Do you have a favorite player class?
I like magic. Magic kind of fascinates me. If there's ever anything that has magic, that's what I try and play.
Is there anything else that we have?
Those are the highlights. James, what would you say that Lee brings to the gaming table? What's his unique contribution? Other than the fabulous beard, of course.
That goes everywhere with them. It's weird to leave it. It's hard to leave behind.
It's attached, you might say.
Well, something that I think is interesting is that Lee is very deliberate. I know in the competitive gaming podcast we talk about, making deliberate choices. And I know that whenever Lee makes a character, anything that he puts on his character sheet isn't willy-nilly. You're very deliberate in the choices that you make. And when you run games with him, it's interesting to see because whatever like in our Tremere game, you've made certain specific choices that are on there. And I know each of those has a reason behind them. It's very thought out. I don't think meticulous is the right word, but it's very measured and, there's a reason behind it.
Even if you don't know that yet, it's almost like you're playing in his game, even when he's not running. You're like, I know this is on the character sheet for a reason, and I'm going to find out when we play what exactly that reason is.
So what about you? What do you think the Lee brings to the table?
I would agree with that, and also like a certain passion for the more detailed game in general. So like, I know Lee that is good for any game, and like if I want to do a hack and slash cut 'em up game, he's going to be fine. But if I want to do something that's a little more frustratingly meticulous investigative game, I know that he's going to be okay doing that too, which is nice.
Right. I know something else I just thought of that I appreciate as well because it's very similar to how I do things. Is Lee, I feel like you appreciate system mastery in a way that I do. For crunchy games, you like to get into the nuts and bolts of it and figure out how it works to make it work best for you. Not that you're a power gamer or something, but you like to know how the bits and pieces work together. And you still learn that through character creation, which is how I used to do it. But I don't know, I've gotten away from that. I don't know, it's because I've read so many stupid gaming books now that I don't do it that way anymore. But I understand and actually do the exact same thing.
I do love to make characters.
It's super helpful to have those people at the table too, because they can help other people make characters. And if you're a GM who is not all about system, like this girl right here, who keep all that damn system, I know that like if I have a question about the rules, because I may have just skimmed over that part, I can probably ask him and he will be like, oh yeah, this is how you do that. I'm like, thanks, buddy.
No problem.
All right.
I guess what I'm trying to say is you complete me.
Oh.
Like twins.
All right, so we're going to jump right into it. So the theme of this episode, because it's going to drop the Wednesday before Halloween, so this will be the last time you guys hear from us before Halloween, is going to be horror. And I'm a big.
Is it okay to be getting excited about the topic of
yes,
horror?
I'm a big fan of horror. Always have been. I love Halloween. We've been involved in haunted houses and different kinds of stuff a lot.
Fun fact: James and I met at the haunted house.
Yes, we did. So it's a special time of year for us. We like it a whole lot, and I just like horror as a genre very, very much. So with that, I have a pop topic today.
Pop topic.
In addition to our regular topic, which is, what is your favorite horror movie and why, and has it inspired you in gaming in any way? So I'm going to go first because I kind of sprung this on everybody, and I think most people around the table probably here know what my favorite horror movie is, which is...
You're going to pick Hellraiser.
I'm going to say
I'm
Hellraiser.
going to stab you in the eye. Now
That's
I have
okay.
to come up with something a bit different. I can't have the same one.
So I'm a huge fan of Hellraiser. It's my favorite horror movie. It comes out of the 80s, which is when I grew up, and nobody does horror like Clive Barker. He just does an amazing job, and I like the idea how Pinhead he's the centerpiece of the movie, you might say, but he's not the bad guy. The people in the movie are the bad guys. He never kills anybody that's a good person. He's there to punish the bad people. And I like the idea of the Cenobites and how they kind of do that and what they represent. I think it's way cool.
I don't think you can say he never kills anybody that's a good person. I think the more important thing is he only kills you if you invited him in the first place. It's got that very, vampire-esque, like, I invited you into the house. Like, well, maybe I didn't know what I was doing, but I opened the box.
Yeah. Well, he never kills
There's a certain amount of curiosity involved, too.
But the girl that opens the box in the first one, she never gets killed.
Well, that's not for lack of trying.
No, but he never actually goes after her.
There's that little girl who looks like she's, like, autistic, maybe. The little blonde girl, and they give her the puzzle box to play with to try and open it.
Which...
He totally kills her.
And which movie was that in?
I think it's... Second.
I don't believe it. We'll have to go back.
Somebody get out their Google.
Yeah, so you can prove us wrong in the show in the comments.
It's gonna be like 9. I'm telling you.
So yeah, I guess I love Hellraiser, and there have been some ones that weren't so good, like the second one where the guy I think it's the second one where he shoots the CDs at people. That one's terrible. It's
the
sort
one
of
in the mansion that I'm pretty sure doesn't even have Pinhead in it.
Mm-hmm.
That was not good.
There's some of them, like any series, I think there's like 6 or 7 of them now.
Then there was the remake they did where they were like in Mexico. That was terrible. Please, if you have not seen that, do not invest the time. It's almost like a spin-off.
So that's my favorite. It has informed my gaming in that I like bad guys that are there to punish bad. I like the anti-hero kind of a thing. Not that Pinhead's a hero, but I like the bad guy that does bad things to bad people. I think that's a cool idea. So, all right. So who's next?
So I think my favorite horror movie was probably The Omen. I was probably 11 when I saw it the first time. The original Omen, I don't know if there was a remake.
Yeah, there's a remake. It's really good though because it's almost shot for shot filmed the exact same. Yeah. So they really I don't even know if it's right to call it a remake. It's something like they just reshot the movie.
Maybe it's more accurate to call it a remake.
So it's actually go ahead.
For being that I was 11, I probably had nightmares for 3 months after I watched it. Even at the time, and if I go back and watch it again, for a while I'm still convinced there's nothing supernatural going on, and that guy is just going crazy. And that's a bunch of freak accidents.
Right.
And not knowing that that there is something going on it really adds to it to me.
I think it's cool. I like movies that kind of do that where they leave you hanging. You don't really know for sure whether it's just a crazy person or supernatural happening until the climax or whatever. Omen that way. Exorcist is that way for me. I remember the first one I saw The Exorcist. I was like, oh my god, this movie is terrifying. Piece soup creeps me out still. So
there's some other movies that were close. Like I enjoyed getting Carrie to watch Aliens for the first time when she was 8 months pregnant. I thought the original Rosemary's Baby, I haven't seen the new one, was really good up until the last 15 minutes when everybody was hailing Satan.
Hail Satan!
Some of the older movies really need some props. Like the original Haunting, The Haunting, if you watch that now, it pretty well stands up. I mean, and it's black and white. It's like 1959 it's pretty old.
Well, that you're talking about that Nosferatu, the actual silent movie. Holy cow! That's if you haven't seen, I'm pretty sure it's public domain. You can probably find it on YouTube. I'll link it if I can, if it's out there, in public domain or whatever. But it is a great one to watch. It has it's silence, visual effects, and he's so creepy, Max Shrek when he walks around. Great movie.
You don't really look at it either and be like, oh, those are totally prosthetic. It still looks legit. I don't know if it's so grainy that it just kind of fudges over those lines, but it's pretty well done.
It's such a cool thing because it's silent. There's no dialogue in it. It just has this feel of creepiness. So.
Okay. So I also really like Hellraiser, but since James took mine, I'm going to go with the best horror film I've seen recently. So that would most definitely be The Babadook.
Oh, that's such a good one. I forgot about that one.
So I guess one of the elements that I like about it is that it's similar to Hellraiser in that it's a simple, mundane thing that kind of brings it to life in the first place. So in Hellraiser, you have the puzzle box. And, anybody could pick it up and just start messing around with it. And then all of a sudden, oh God, what have I done? And in the Babadook, you have a children's book. That you read, and it's also sort of pulls in that idea of the whole voodoo concept, it's only real if you believe it's real. So it talks about this horror creature, I guess it's almost like a fairy tale creature called the Babadook, who comes, and that he is on his way when you hear 3 knocks, and it's something just so very mundane. That can suddenly just, send chills up your spine. And he's sort of a shadowy creature, reminiscent of the boogeyman. So he's hiding in the closet. He's behind the door. You never really get a full look at him. And it also does a really excellent job of creating that human aspect of horror. Because aside from him, you have this mother who is just completely losing her mind. She doesn't know how to handle her child. There's some conflict between them that is really just almost soul-crushing. So the level of isolation and hopelessness that is just created in that dynamic is truly excellently done.
That one's on Netflix right now. I'm almost sure it's still on there, which is where we found it. Some friends recommended it. So I'll link all these in the show notes. A lot of them can be found on Netflix. If not, find a place to check them out and go to the $5 bin. That's a good place to find a lot of this stuff sometimes because they're older and they're not as popular as they used to be. So right on. Horror movies are awesome. Along with that, I guess we're just going to jump right into our main topic, which is horror, and gaming specifically. I guess we can kind of start off by kind of like, what is horror and what are the main themes of horror? The first thing for me that comes to mind is that helplessness, I guess, and weakness exposed, kind of a thing is a big theme of horror. Powerlessness, hopelessness.
Anytime a character feels particularly mortal.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the key elements are isolation and suspense.
Suspense is a big part of it. Suspense is a weird thing because like horror is one of those genres that sort of straddles a lot of different other genres, and I don't know how like themes or like because like suspense is a big part of it. The thriller, suspense thriller is part of it. And then horror fits into so many other things, whether it's like Alien with sci-fi, sci-fi horror, or Silence of the Lambs is one a lot of people think of as a horror movie. It's almost more of a mystery thriller, though, And obviously your slasher films, your classic gory, that kind of stuff, films as well. So it's one of those weird things where it's a lot of things, and it's weird because it's a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Because what I find scary, you might think is just the most ridiculous thing in the world.
Clowns.
Yeah, I'm not scared of those. Whatever.
But other things that you think are ridiculous, I might find terrifying, like dolls or birds.
Right. Oh man, Hitchcock. We didn't talk about Hitchcock as a pop topic. Oh, he's so good too.
I think the distinction between the different kinds of being scared. Horror isn't the same thing as just butchering people like it is in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre or House of a Thousand Corpses. That's a terror. It certainly, if you're that person that's being terrorized, you're going to run and be scared and run away as best you can. But horror is something that is not always that blatant. Like coming home and finding your wife chopped into tiny pieces. Whoever was there that did it wasn't present while you were there, and you might think that he is for a while, and that certainly might be horrifying. But you're not going to suddenly run screaming.
Right.
From the action.
It's almost like the difference between a slasher horror versus a psychological horror. Like they are two very distinctly different things, but both easily fit in the horror shoebox. So I think that, like, I guess if we break it down that way, so we've got the psychological horror. So what are some examples of a psychological horror?
Seven.
Seven is like a great one, like on cue. That's a great one for. I'll link that one.
What's the one where Harrison Ford is like the first time he plays a bad guy?
Oh God, where he has the lady in the bathtub. Don't want to give any spoilers in case anybody's seen it. Hasn't seen it yet.
Called? Oh, I already kind of spoiled it because I said Harrison Ford is a bad guy.
Ah, dang it. Well,
What Lies Beneath?
Yeah, What Lies Beneath. Spoiler: that movie came out in the early 2000s. So
You should have seen it by now.
Yeah. So. Can you think of one more example of a psychological horror? Gothica with Halle Berry. That's another psychological horror, kind of like.
Yeah, but there's also aspects
supernatural
of paranormal with that because there is a ghost.
Right. So I guess that kind of leads us right to the next one, which is paranormal horror. So you think of like The Exorcist,
Shutter Island.
Oh, that's almost that's psychological horror, I guess, because like there's nothing supernatural about it. He's the crazy guy in the.
But you don't know he's crazy to start with. At first, there's that. Like element of you think there might be some haunting aspects going on.
So there's Exorcist, The Omen, almost all those what do you call it? Possession ones. Exorcism, Emily Rose, House on Haunted Hill, Paranormal Activity.
The Haunting.
Yeah, there's any of those haunted house style, that kind of style one. I think even like some of your slasher ones kind of border like Jeepers Creepers is kind of a supernatural one a little bit.
Candyman.
Mm-hmm. And then that kind of leads us into the creature films. So Freddy, Jason.
I think you could argue Child's Play could be a creature film.
Child's Play. So terrible.
And then your old school ones too. Wolfman, Creature of the Black Lagoon.
Dracula. So after the creature ones, what else I guess is there?
Slasher films.
Yeah, slasher.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Right.
I think really Jason probably falls more in that. Than
right. I guess you get like the gore.
Particularly the first one.
The gore ones, like the Grindhouse
House of
style.
1,000 Corpses.
Yeah. Devil's Rejects.
Elm Street series.
Yeah.
I don't know if that qualifies as supernatural or slasher.
It's more paranormal because there's so much dream stuff involved.
That's kind of a lot of them kind of straddle the border, but that's a creature because it's Freddy. You know what I mean? Everybody,
all I can think about is the tongue coming through the phone every time.
It licks him in the ear.
Oh God, it's so gross.
All right, so how about some games that do horror the best? Now, obviously, there's almost any system you can adapt to do horror, but what systems do you think do horror the best?
I think there's quite a few. Obviously, Dredd comes to mind.
Yeah, Dredd would be one of the newer indie games.
And just the mechanic for that at building suspense with the
Yeah.
Jenga tower is
So just for you guys who don't know, Dredd is a storytelling game, and the mechanic is when you do something that you might have a chance of failure at, you have to pull blocks out of a Jenga tower, just like the regular Jenga game. And then when the tower falls over, is that when the game ends or everybody dies? Or
that is when the character is removed from the game. So whoever pulled the last Jenga block that knocked over the tower will be removed in a murderous fashion, or if you can't work it into the game, removed at a slightly later date. But generally, they're removed from the game in some fashion right at that point.
I suppose as we look at the list of things here, we talk about games, because I think the giant in the room is Call of Cthulhu and Trail of Cthulhu, which when we talk about types of horror, we didn't mention Lovecraftian specifically, but it fits like kind of that psychological horror with some paranormal aspects to it.
Or the creature film,
yeah.
Depending on which sort of Cthulhu version.
Right. So I think Call of Cthulhu is a giant in the room that kind of, screams out. They were the ones that really did it first and did it best initially, kind of set the tone for horror gaming in a lot of ways. It's a great game. I'm not a big fan of the system, the way it works. That's just me. Now, Trail of Cthulhu, I like quite a bit, because I think the way it works with investigation is really good, because it emphasizes the sanity and the madness. But if you fail a roll to find something out, you can't do that. It doesn't dead end the game right there, because the premise of Trail of Cthulhu, I feel like, is the more information you get, the more danger you get in. So then you have to get more information to get out of that danger, which then puts you in more danger. And I think that's called a positive feedback loop. It continues until the climax. And it does a really good job, because you spend points to get more information if you go to the right places and do the right research. So I think that one does it really well.
Any system where you can make your characters feel mortal. You're obviously not going to have it a lot in D&D or Fate. All flesh must be eaten, as long as you don't give anybody armor.
Yeah. Plus, it's a fun game. I feel like when people go into the all flesh games, they go in there expecting to get torn to bits in a Walking Dead sort of a way. I think Walking Dead has done a lot for that kind of genre.
It's kind of the whole basis for the World of Darkness.
Yeah, I agree. World of Darkness is another kind of giant in the room, with specifically the two that scream out to me is Vampire the Masquerade. You kind of, yeah. In Vampire the Masquerade, you're sort of the monster that loses their humanity and has to give in to the beast and what you lost, and that's kind of what it focuses on, which I think is really cool. Wraith, the Oblivion is another one, which is just a great game. It's kind of
beyond that, the idea of somebody else creating your shadow and adding that dynamic in that somebody is actively trying to mess you up, and it's so dark. Oh, there's a darkness to the creation of the Wraith shadow that is present.
That's the thing. So, for those of you who aren't familiar with Wraith,
I love it.
Wraith is a game where you play a character who dies in the real world, but there's something that keeps you have some drive to stay there, and that's what you usually play, your disembodied spirit or your ghost or however you want to look at it. But someone else at the table makes your shadow, which isn't the bad version of you. It's sort of the antithesis of you. It's the shadow's job is to basically break your character down so that they will fall into oblivion. And it's a lot different when you have when the game master is doing that to you versus when a player at the table is actively there, and there are things they have their own character sheet for the shadow, and there are things that they get to do. They can give you dice and make things easier. It's a really cool thing to do. You have to have the right group to do it, though, because it is kind of a confrontational game, because
player versus player.
Yeah, it's a delicate thing, but if you have the right group, it can be really awesome.
And then, of course, Orpheus goes right along with that
Orpheus
as well.
is so good, yeah. So Orpheus is kind of a continuation of Wraith. So I'll link all these in the show notes so you guys can check them out. Dark Heresy, which is the Warhammer 40k universe. So, I mean, not just specifically Dark Heresy, but any of the line. Dark Heresy, Only War, Black Crusade. You play the bad guys in that one. You play the Chaos people. But what's the Death Watch? Yeah. Death Watch is the Space Marine version of it. So for those of you who aren't familiar with 40k, it's just a world of endless war and hopelessness of the Empire of Man. And there's this chaos element, which is very Lovecraftian, that is just, sort of empire being crushed under its own weight. And it's really, really good.
Dark science fiction.
Yeah, very good. Very dark.
Lamentations of the Flame Princess.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that one. So we have quite a few of those, too. And it's an old school Renaissance, or I call it old school Renaissance, but it's old school revival. The old school gaming, more in the first or second edition vein of things. And it's got a lot of horror aspects to it. And your characters, like you said, Lee, are very susceptible to death in that one. It's very easy to die.
It kind of pulls in aspects. I mean, there are books dedicated to the aspects of the Cthulhu mythos, but there's also a very excellent fairy tale changeling feel to that game also.
Oh, yeah. Oh, we didn't mention Changing the Lost as far as the New World of Darkness, or Chronicles of Darkness as it's called now. I personally feel like Changing the Lost is the most horrifying one, because your character as a mortal gets abducted or stolen away by the ancient beings of the fairy, and they do terrible things to you, and you eventually escape, and that's what all the changelings are. And there's a piece of the fairy sticks to them. That's what makes them changelings, and it's a really cool game too, about horror and what you lost and all that kind of stuff and what you become. So Little Fears is a game where you play children essentially. I think you're supposed to be from the age of 5 to 12 in it. It's a pretty dark game. I'll link it and we have it. It's a hard game to run though. I will be honest. Like, I like dark games, but I've never actually ran it. I thought about it a couple times, but no, I think I need to run. I think I ran that game once or twice. But it is a hard game to run because it's about children that are sort of like neglected. Those are the characters that are starting to lose their innocence. So it's a pretty dark game. There's a lot of horror to it. If you've got the right group and you kind of navigate those waters, they're pretty tempestuous. I don't know what the right word would be, but they're pretty they're fraught with peril. There you go. But it's a really cool game. What was it? What you just said?
Wealth of small press games. Don't Rest Your Head.
Yeah, that's a hard game. It's a surrealist kind of a game.
And it didn't go over as well with our gaming group, but I think there was some difficulty in kind of making the transition to that world.
Yeah, I think that part of that was on me. I didn't set it up very well because it's a surreal kind of dreamscape almost, and I didn't do the best job of leading into that. I kind of did it too much of a shock initially. Interest B, I've talked about that several times, is my new hotness that I like so much. It has some horror aspects to it.
You have a penny for your thoughts?
Oh yeah, we haven't played that one. We had that for a long time. We haven't played it. But it's you kind of like do a psychologist kind of a thing. It's an awesome game.
I feel like there is just kind of a wealth of small press games dedicated to horror because it is kind of a special niche sort of, and it's definitely not something that everybody can do well. It's not something that everyone can run well.
No, and the other thing is, and we'll talk about specifically running it, but something that I think is interesting about the small press games is that they find a specific mechanic that emphasizes one particular aspect of the horror, and I feel like they play that up to their benefit. So the game is kind of narrow in scope in what it's designed to do, but it does that thing very well. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So those are the main ones that I can think of, or I guess all of us can think of here at the mics here that specifically do horror well, and they're designed to do horror. Not that you can't have horror aspects in any game, but I think that those games are designed to run horror. So I'll put a link to all those in the show notes, whether it's to their own webpage or their drive-through RPG link or whatever. So let's talk about running horror games and things that make a lot of people have a struggle with running a horror game, and it's something that I've done for a long time. I really enjoy it. It's my favorite genre of game to run. But let's talk about some of the specific things about horror that in role-playing games and tabletop games that make it hard to run.
I think the biggest thing that makes it hard to run is the suspense. Especially if you have a long-running game, like you have to find a way to maintain that tension.
Mm-hmm.
You have to manage, like table talking and like a little humor and side conversation is okay, but you have to keep everybody focused and keep that suspense building. And I think, for a one-shot, it's obviously going to be easier, but
right.
Especially if you're running a longer game, just keeping that going is difficult.
All right, so let's specifically kind of mention long-term games versus a one-shot. So in a one-shot, it's pretty easy to manage a mood because you start it, in my mind, when you do those games, you start them in media res, where you're as far into the action as you can be. And you've already set the tone. Everybody sat down with the expectation this is going to be a horror game, and we're going to drive it like a rental and see what happens and let the wheels fall off of it and the pieces fall where they may. And there's not a lot of people that are upset. But I think you're exactly right when you say running a long-term game, how you manage that differently, because horror, a lot of it is about the rising action. It's not about the climax. It's about that rising action up to the climax. So there's a setup and then the build up to that climax. And it can be hard to manage several moments of where you build up to the payoff and then you start over again and you build up to the payoff. A lot of times in those long-term games, sometimes that build up can take too long and it can kind of flounder. So are there any games that you could point to that we've had that you think where the rising action happened more than once?
I think when we have those kinds of things, it's more episodic almost. Like there may be some kind of overarching villain that you're working to, and those longer running games are almost always a more not suspenseful, more like mystery investigative sort of. So you may have some minor sort of hack and slash horror built into the smaller points of the game and some suspense with that. But you have some kind of overarching mysterious villain. So that is what's kind of building your suspense is that that unknown aspect that we're working towards.
Okay. Right. So
I thought the all flesh must be eaten games were pretty suspenseful, and when they were run longer term.
How so?
Well, the first one that I ran, a good deal less so than the second one. I kept showing you guys what was coming without throwing you to the zombies just yet.
Right.
And I did it for 4 sessions.
It was very well done too. At one point, we discovered like an unguarded tunnel, and I was just like, oh my god, this is so bad.
Well, I think that's the classic Hitchcock trick of where the monster is much scarier when you can't see him.
I think it's scarier when you know it's coming and you just don't know when.
Right.
Well, and the zombies almost act on a different aspect too, because like one zombie, I'm sure, terrifying, but the idea of the horde of zombies,
that hopelessness,
the relentlessness of that enemy adds its own aspect. Plus, cannibalism is terrifying. Let's be honest.
I agree. Well, something that comes to mind for me is when Vampire the Requiem first came out. We play a lot of World of Darkness, and especially at that point, when that first came out, I actually used the fact that the players at the table didn't know anything about the world against them. So in Vampire the Requiem, there's covenants, which is sort of like your political or philosophical ideation of how you believe in being a vampire. And none of the players at the table knew anything about it, and I specifically kind of kept it a secret a little bit and was kind of shy with the information, and they learned in game. So I know Lacey played in that game.
I think that is something that is definitely fun, and it's building the suspense, but you also have to be very careful with that. Because if you do not leave enough breadcrumbs, you run that risk of crossing over the line into where you've gone to the point now where it's just frustrating for players, and now they don't want to play your game because it's no longer fun.
In that one, it was like the players never knew what was actually legit and true, because they kept getting fed information by one guy, and then they eventually met up with a second NPC that was like, no, that's totally wrong. That guy's crazy and feeding you a line of crap. But they didn't know if they could believe the second person, so it was this whole kind of idea of, like, I guess it was more suspenseful of that they didn't know who they could trust. They had a ton of information, and actually, if I remember correctly, there was a sheet of notes that said facts, lesser facts, things that we think are true, and there may have been a fourth category, I can't remember. But it was great to see because the players, they didn't know, there was a lot of options and a lot of information, but they had no idea who to trust. So there was a lot of discussion at the table about, who they were and how they could do things, and it built a lot of suspense that way. But like you said, that is very hard. You have to manage that correctly.
You have to walk that line.
Right. And the thing that kept that interesting was the discussion between the players. It wasn't, you have to pay attention. When there's a lull and you can tell that there's that lull happening, it's time to step up and add some new action to it. It's time to do something new to set off the new piece of information to move things forward, or the new NPC to come forward to put you in danger, or whatever that is. I guess it's more about paying attention to the players, which I think is true in any kind of game, but really more specifically in horror, where you pay attention to what your players are doing and how they're reacting to things and what are they writing down.
I don't know. Sometimes I think it's almost the opposite problem, wherein I came up with this really cool idea that I want to kill all the PCs in, but I have to draw it out. And you need to draw it out just a little too long in order for the PCs to get paranoid.
That's true. It's hard to know when to drop that bomb.
You have to build up to a certain amount of character investment too. So like if you kill him in the first 5 minutes, you're like, I just made just dots on my character sheet. But then if you let me play it for a couple hours, now I'm invested.
You're invested
in
it.
Character.
Well, then even more so if you played it for several sessions. That's something else that's interesting to manage in a horror game is, in any horror movie, there's all these tropes and things that happen about when you run upstairs instead of going out the front door and that kind of stuff. And what makes horror scary is the risk is real because people are dying. And that can be kind of hard to manage in a role-playing game, because if none of the players around the table are dying, at a certain point, if it's a multi-session game, you begin to lose the feel of that risk. That's something that I feel when I play those games. I'm like, oh, this is very cool. I'm not scared of the zombie horde or the big bad monster or whatever anymore because, well, the four of us have been making bad decisions for 4 games now and nobody's dead yet, you know. So I would say that one thing is to make character death real, but make it matter and make it dramatic. And I feel like if you let your players know that out the gate that, hey, this is like, if you guys make bad decisions, you're going to die. But I would point to certain shows like The Walking Dead. When some of those main characters die, it mattered. It was at the right moment. 90% of them mattered, and it was at the right moment, and it was dramatic, and it was scary, and it had impact on the game.
I think there's an important thing to talk about that show as well. So you have the zombie flick, which is kind of like a, I don't know, cross between a creature film and a slasher flick, I guess. When you have, high death, you have high gore, but something that show adds in that it does a good job of is that social dynamic.
Yeah.
So you have a new aspect of that isolation and fear because now, you're so isolated anyway, being one of the only humans left after this zombie apocalypse. And now you finally see another human and you get that hope and it's dangled right there in front of you, only to find out that, oh my gosh, these guys are murderous a-holes. And here I am back to being alone again. And
the premise of The Walking Dead show specifically is The Walking Dead isn't the walkers and the zombies. It's the survivors. They're the Walking Dead.
After the initial outbreak, zombies don't kill people.
No.
People do.
That's another cool aspect of it is how bad, like I guess in an apocalyptic scenario or a desperate, so not even necessarily apocalyptic, but when people are desperate and they're truly desperate, all bets are off, and yeah.
And you see it like in some of the classic like zombie literature. The I Am Legend story is all about, the story of this guy's isolation set to the backdrop of a zombie apocalypse.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have like that Day by Day Armageddon book,
mm-hmm.
which again is man versus man with the aspect of the animalistic zombie is almost secondary to that conflict.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the real world things that I've seen that was completely ridiculous in the moment was at a haunted house that we ran. There was a chainsaw room because there's always a chainsaw in a haunted house. I know, surprise, surprise. Well, the chainsaw guy came out. The group gets scared. Oh my God, chainsaw, vroom, vroom, everybody's scared. Well, the building it was in had a closet, and there was a 30-something adult man who ran to the closet, opened it, got in, and was holding the closet closed from the inside. He came to the haunted house with his 8-year-old to 10-year-old son and was so scared that he was holding the door closed and completely abandoned his son out there in the room. And we were like, you need to come out. And he's like, no. So the rest of the group moved on into the haunted house. We're like, the chainsaw is shut off, sir. Your son is out here and he's terrified right now. Like this guy had such an irrational fear of the whole thing. It was one of those great moments where you see he completely, I'm like, we'd all love to say, oh no, I'd stay there and do it. No, this guy totally freaked out, ran away, abandoned his kid, and his kid's out there mortified with strangers and masked. And I'm like, no, it's okay. It's just a show, It was just a great moment to see like real, true horror on someone and like how they reacted. It's something I always remember for, like when I go to run games, like, wow, it's just so irrational. And that's really what a big part of it is. It's just the irrationality of it, like the abject total
that
loss.
That goes back to what we were talking about earlier, though. That's not horror, that's terror.
Well, that's true.
It's him running from the monster.
Yeah, I think that's something that both your Call of Cthulhu games and your World of Darkness games do well. Is that they have that willpower sort of check built in and that fight or flight reflex, or I guess in the case of Call of Cthulhu, will check or lose your mind reflex
sanity
is built in there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very much incorporated into the game, whether you stand and fight or you lose your mind or you run away screaming like a small child.
So are there any specific things like building tension that you can think of, like advice that you can think of to give, like how you build tension in a game? Not like in a specific game, but like techniques that you use?
So when I was doing the Fate Children's game, I tried to incorporate some aspects of horror into that. And one of the things that I did was by asking you guys specifically, what is your character afraid of?
Mm-hmm.
What are you afraid of? You need to create in your characters something that they value. so that they have something to fall back on. Because if there is, the hopelessness thing is another thing that's like that, that mystery. So it's only so good until it becomes frustrating. So the hopelessness will only get you so far until there really is no hope. And then what point do I have in this character? So you need to have something built in, and the Dredd game talks about that. You need to have something built in that is an ongoing cause for hope for your character.
Right.
So when the situation is hopeless, why are you still going?
Mm-hmm.
Why are you still pursuing this end?
Well, then it's something that you can build them up and then tear it away, and then build them back up again, and just tear it. Like, that's the whole premise of it, I feel like, in a lot of ways. Those character questioners are a great thing. Dredd is a game that even if you don't ever plan on playing Dredd, it's a great book to have because it has a lot of great suggestions and questions to ask characters and players.
Actually, at the bottom of every single page of the book, there's just a running line of questions along the bottom page of the page of every, just unique questions and things you wouldn't even think of. I mean, something as mundane as, why does your character always wear steel-toed shoes even though he has a desk job?
Right.
I mean, like, your character could come up with, a million ways to answer that question that as a GM you haven't thought of. So I guess the big thing I think of as far as building suspense is creating a character with enough background that your players have an investment in it, because if there is no investment, then there's no risk.
I think that's something we didn't mention, is that making sure that your players, when they're making their characters for their horror game, or if you're doing pre-gens for a one-shot or something, that they have enough invested in the characters when they create the character that the decisions the characters make matter. Because if the decisions the characters make don't matter, then it doesn't make it a horror game anymore. Exactly. It's just, whatever, I'm going to go do this, and then no one cares. Who cares? Not that they have to be so invested that they're going to be torn apart if something goes bad, but they need to be invested at least to the level that they care about the decisions that are made. So something that I find that is useful is I struggle with it sometimes because I get excited, and when I get excited I talk louder. I'm that guy. I'm the loud guy. When you use your tone of voice and you're conscious of that, and when it's at the creepy part, if you lower your voice and you can talk lower, and if you pay attention, you'll notice sometimes your players, they lean forward to hear you, and like when you see them lean forward, like as I kind of let the cat out of the bag sometimes on some of this, like, I've got you. I can tell you're invested, you're paying attention, and I've got you in that moment right there where and you sort of pay attention to the tone of your voice and how you do things, and then when all of a sudden you're talking low, and then you get louder really quickly, to emphasize that can really be in a kind of meta way.
I think just what you're talking about there can be just mundane ways to maintain the mood and atmosphere. So other good suggestions for maintaining atmosphere?
I sometimes like to suggest that things are related, but not give enough information where anybody can be certain that it is. Like in the All Flesh Must Be Eaten game, where they found the tunnel under that town, there was something banging against something at the end of that tunnel, and they never bothered to go check to see what it was.
I believe the decision was like, there's nothing critical down there. It's great.
Yeah. So they just boxed it in with a refrigerator and called it a day.
I call that decisive ignorance.
Maybe it was related to somebody that was trying to bring zombies into the town. Maybe it wasn't.
Right. I guess that mystery, the unknown, what is this thing? Something that I like to use, I guess, mundane-wise, is music, which can be hard to do because you have to use that right, to where there's a couple playlists that exist on Yahoo, on a couple playlists that exist on YouTube. I just search like Call of Cthulhu soundtrack, and it has a ton of different things you can just run through.
It's important, that it's not distracting.
No, I think things without lyrics are important because it doesn't pull you away from things.
The right tone. Plenty of minors too.
Right, yeah, and it just sort of, you want it low enough to where it fades into the background, to where because if you think about a movie, when you watch a movie, if there's no soundtrack, it's pretty dull. You know what I mean? Like, if you think of those sweeping scores that they have, not like I know there's some people that like those scores very much, and they specifically know them to pull from, and I don't. I just generally find something on YouTube, look through a couple things, and find a playlist to make, and it works great.
We used to play Midnight Syndicate at Haunted Houses a lot.
Yeah, Midnight Syndicate is a great band, especially for horror, that has that kind of lyric without lyrics and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Another good trick, I guess, for building horror, when you're creating your setting for horror, you need to be even more descriptive than you are with your regular setting. So, just excessive adjective usage. And not just limiting that to visual either. Like you need to describe really like what people are hearing, what they're seeing,
what they
maybe
smell,
even what they're smelling.
Well, smell is a funny thing because it
What
triggers
they're
memories.
feeling, you
Yeah.
know, if there's no vision involved in that scene, what they're physically feeling, like tactile sensations,
Well,
is a great way to bring that world to life.
Description is one of those funny things. I was reading on a forum today. His question was along the lines of, I want to give descriptive descriptions, precise and with detail. And how do I know when enough is enough? You know, and he had a written, sort of like for lack of a better word, box text of what he wanted to read to his players. And the thing that immediately popped into my head was, if you can have that in your mind, you want to be descriptive, like you're talking about, where you can talk about like
right up to the point of uncomfortable.
Well, but
so you're not just in in a room. You're in a room that it's got an odd musty odor. But maybe you're picking up something. Let's say you're picking up a knife. Okay, but for some reason you pick up this knife and it's sticky. You know, that instantly brings something very real to mind.
Right.
You know, like you can almost feel it.
Well, that like smells like that sickly sweet smell of rot.
Right.
You know, there's a lot of those things you can play on, like the sound your feet make as you move across, like, you know how water warped wood gets like on hardwood floors that's uneven. It gets that kind of grainy, scratchy sound to it. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things that you can play on.
Really just, use your adjectives.
Yeah.
When it comes to tactile things, use sticky, moist, squishy.
Moist is a great word, yeah.
You know, anything that makes people uncomfortable. And really, it's kind of universal. So if I can describe something in my mind in a way that makes me uncomfortable, then odds are it's going to make someone else uncomfortable
So he was asking, how do you know when enough is enough? And I thought the simplest, most straightforward answer was, as you give this description, just look at your players. Because you can tell when they're interested and when they start to lose interest because you've gone too far. So if you just pay attention to how they're looking at you and, you know, how often they look at you at their character sheet, or if the, you know, assuming you already have their interest, you know, they're not, you know, tooling around on their cell phone, when they start to sit back as opposed to sit forward, you know, and then that's when you've got to that point, that's when you back off, or that's when you drop the next big detail of something that, you know, that's going to happen that triggers something.
I almost feel like for this particular genre, you could probably even have like, you know, your 5 basic senses written down and just a list of adjectives for each one of those senses. And when you walk into a room, you're describing the room, throw in a couple adjectives off that list if you don't already have.
Or even if you just write the senses down so it reminds you, because sometimes you get so much in the rush of things. This is something I have problems with. Sometimes I'm so excited about what's happening, what I know is happening next, that I rush I'm rushing towards the next thing because I know that's what it is, instead of, you know, always consciously taking into consideration to slow down. Sometimes I actually write that down on my notes, slow down in big capital letters, and then writing taste, touch, sight.
Like doing that in any kind of game is going to add to the overall flavor of the game, but I feel like in horror specifically,
it adds a lot to
essential.
It. Mm-hmm. Well, that's what builds attention and builds the scene.
It's not just adjectives. I like to use similes sometimes too. Like the ball doesn't just get kicked across the room; it skitters across the room like a cockroach who's fleeing from the sudden on-turn of lights.
Right. Lighting is an easy one to play with too. You know, you have to have enough lighting to be able to see what you're writing, what you're doing. But if you can bring the lights down a little low, you know, that can add to the mood.
There's a certain aspect for a mechanic also, like we talked about, the game that involves like tarot cards or, you know, just any kind of prop that you can build in that has natural mystery built around it.
Right.
So if you want to have, you know, here's some candles laying out, even if they're not lit, here's a Ouija board. You're just setting up the physical setting where your players are at by adding some things that are naturally creepy. So if you happen to have a copy of the Necronomicon just laying around, you can just put that out there on your table, see what happens.
I think he holds it back. And then at the moment, you just drop it on the table. Boom! You know, here it is. We've got some cool props that we have from like other haunted house stuff that we've done that you can just sort of lay out there.
Carrie one time was running a D&D game, and she wanted it to be kind of a horror kind of episode. And it just so happened that I had brought my book with me at the time, and I was reading The King in Yellow for the first time. And periodically, when there was a lull in the action, like when she had to go to the bathroom or something, I would start reading from The King in Yellow.
That's excellent.
I love Hasper is my favorite Lovecraft. All hail Robert W. Chambers. All right, I guess I guess a lot of this is about tension and mood. And I guess the highlights would be, pay attention to how you're describing things and the things that you're saying. Modulate your voice, to describe things, well. Be loud when you need to and talk quietly when you want to build tension and people to pay attention.
Use those character sheets at the beginning to build aspects of hope, fear, and trust and distrust also. Inter-player conflict.
I guess something else we didn't really talk about, which we probably should touch on, is playing horror games at the table and knowing your players and where that line is, because everybody has their own personal tragedies and stuff that they bring to the table with them. And while we would all love to leave that at home, it's something you carry with you all the time. So if you know there's something specific that your players, or you may not even know, and it may come up in games. I guess that comes down to, like I said, when you pay attention to how they're sitting, but pay attention to how much besides how much they're paying attention to you, but if someone is very obviously, this is interesting, being uncomfortable in game and being actually uncomfortable with what's happening. Like at the games on demand, they always have the black X in the middle of the table to touch if things are uncomfortable or whatever.
I think that might be important in this kind of game if you're running a game for players that you don't know.
Right, yeah, if you don't know them, that's very important. But I think so long as if you have a good amount of trust built up among your players and that people shouldn't feel bad to step forward and say, this is not cool, man, because of whatever, I don't want to explore this anymore. And that's fine, and that's fair, and then, maybe you move on from somewhere else. Something else I think is important, too, is just besides the horror game, if you only run horror games, they kind of start to lose it, and you start to fall into these habits that you use to develop horror. So changing the games that you play in between, so that if you're playing, your epic fantasy game, maybe after that game is over, maybe it is time to break out the horror game. But maybe horror isn't the answer.
Well, and when you're running your horror games, don't set up the same, don't M. Night Shyamalan your players every single time. Don't build it up where they can't trust this particular character NPC trope every single time.
Yeah, betrayal, the same old betrayal every time. Cause
pay attention to what goes on in your plots and be cognizant of what you've done in the past.
Right, yeah, breaking those patterns is what makes it horrifying, not the same thing over and over again. Is there anything else we should hit on, anything?
I don't know. I feel like we've pretty well hashed it out. You have anything else to add?
I don't think so.
All right, well, we may hit horror again because it's one of our favorites. Kind of off the cuff a little bit here today, but so like I said, we may touch on it again, but I think this is a good starting point, and it's Halloween, so happy Halloween, everybody, for those that enjoy it, trick-or-treating, celebrating, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I guess that'll do it. So until next week, happy Halloween, and we'll see you guys next week.
Thanks for listening. This has been another episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at incompetech.com. You can find us at justonemorefix.com and follow us on Twitter at JustOneMoreFix.